Mark, it is so good to have you as part of the Global Mindfulness Summit. You've been somebody I've respected and followed for many years, and it's just really lovely to have you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, it's a pleasure to be here.
I want to talk about how you initially got interested in kind of the whole world of mindfulness and meditation, and I believe it was in college. Is that correct, or was it even
It was
before
actually
college?
before that. It's funny, during COVID season, I've been reading more, and I picked up an old book that was really influential when I was a teenager, when I was like 15, 16, Walden, on Walden Pond by Henry Thoreau. And in the book, he talked about the Upanishads and the Vedas and to the ancient Eastern religions. And it was so mysterious to me back then. And I had sort of that implanted in my consciousness. And I went to visit my sister at Amherst College, where she was going to school. And she got so excited about this lecture by this incredible professor named Robert Thurman, was sort of the first Tibetan monk who was a Westerner and ordained by the Dalai Lama, and has been an incredible influence in bringing Tibetan Buddhism and wisdom from the East to the West. I went to one of his lectures. It was like 1975, I think. And it just opened my eyes to a whole new world of thinking and being and exploring, and this mysterious place called Tibet that had sort of locked itself away from the world and had gone into inner space instead of outer space. And at the same time, my sister had a boyfriend who was a TM teacher. She used to call him a blissenini because he was always meditating, and I learned how to do TM in 1975. So it was really a long time ago, which is now around 45 years ago. It's scary to say, but yes, it was 45 years ago. And that was sort of my entryway. And when I ended up in college, how serendipity works. I don't really believe in chance, and the universe has its own way of guiding you to whatever you should be doing. And I sat down, had got on my courses set, and I sat down at dinner in the first week of classes in my new dorm. And this kid was talking about this incredible professor from Paris who was teaching about Buddhism and Asian religions. And I had to take this class. And so I dropped one of my classes and I started his class, ended up taking every single one of his classes and pretty much every other class on, Asian religions and Buddhism and Hinduism and the Tibetan medicine, Buddha and everything. And I was like, wow, I guess I have to do a major. And they told me I had to do a major in my junior year. I'm like, well, I haven't really thought about that. They said, well, you have a lot of Asian studies credits, so you can be an Asian studies major. So that's sort of what happened. And I ended up getting with a crew, which was a very funny kind of hippie kind of commune crew. It followed this guy who'd come back from India, who was this Jewish guy from New York, whose name was Freedom. And he sat on a park bench in New York City, in Greenwich Village, Washington Square Park, and all these people gathered around him, and he has white robes, long hair, and didn't speak at all. And people thought he was a guru, so they just hung out with him. And he was a bit of a nutty guy, but he ended up with a crew in Ithaca, where I was, called the Yay God family, like Yay God. And they had an incredible center there, and turned into a Buddhist meditation center. So it was a Zen Buddhist center, Sasaki Roshi, who was Leonard Cohen's teacher. And so I did a lot of sessions back then, 12 hours, 14 hours a day meditation, with this sort of old Japanese character. It was pretty funny. So yeah, that was sort of my introduction into meditation, mindfulness, and was a yoga teacher before I ended up being a doctor. So it was sort of an afterthought being a doctor.
And
I was like, going to be a monk or I'm going to be a doctor? I'm like, well, I think I'm going to be a doctor because I'm not sure I want to be a monk.
Well, you've also taken a very unique expression as a doctor, we should say, right? So you which I think is actually fascinating. I'd love for you to talk a little about it, because I think a lot of people feel like they have a certain amount of knowledge, but they don't necessarily know what to do with that knowledge and how to make it kind of purposeful for them and also a value add for the world. And so as I see your path, I say, wow, you took all this knowledge that you got kind of from medical school and from Buddhism, but you're like, all right, now I need to make that applicable for people in my own unique way. I'm curious what that process was like for you. Was there a dark night of the soul, or was it just kind of listening to your own instincts and intuition, or how did that, your own kind of expression of what it means to be a doctor kind of emerge?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you're sort of joking about being a monk or a doctor. And actually, I took this class by by this Professor Raoul Birnbaum, a nice Jewish guy, called the Medicine Buddha, and it was about healing and the healing traditions within Buddhism around healing of the mind, but also about Tibetan doctors and Tibetan medicine. And I thought to myself, I do want to do something that is connected to service and compassion. I really resonated with those concepts, those ideas of compassion, and healing, and Buddhism is really a therapy of the mind. It's a philosophy, a description of how the mind works, and healing of the mind that keeps us suffering. Right? It's sort of an end to suffering is sort of the path of Buddhism, and so. My young 20s, I was really drawn to that notion of compassion and to service as a path. And I thought, I left college and wasn't sure what I was going to do, and went on a long backpacking trip by myself, and hiked for 10 miles a day, and just sort of thought, and thought, well, maybe I'll try to go to be in medicine, because I studied ancient healing traditions, and I was going to go to, so I spoke Chinese and I studied Chinese medicine, the theoretical foundations of Chinese medicine in college. I studied ancient healing systems, planet medicine, and I was sort of really enamored with the whole idea of becoming a Chinese doctor and going to China, and I was going to apply to medicine in China and go to China. And I was like, well, I don't want to sort of be in a fascist dictatorship for my 20s. So I decided maybe I'll just try to medical school, because, and I really hadn't had a lot of science courses or anything. So I had to go back and take science classes and do my MCATs. And, I barely got in. I literally barely got in. I was like on the wait list for one school that I got in at the last minute. And I was like, no.
And then you took that, and there must have been a moment, right, where it's like, all right, now this is completed. What is my own karmic path, if you will, to know how to bring that into the world and use that in a way that's beneficial? Was that clear to you at the time, or did you kind of walk down a number of different paths and realize, oh, there's a functional medicine path that I need to kind of walk down?
Yeah.
Or how do you see that process?
Well, essentially, I'm working on a book called Notes from God, Stumbling Toward the Truth. And it's all about the little notes in our life that come along that kind of guide us, and aren't necessarily the things we've chosen for ourselves or that we do intentionally, but that somehow we're guided to and through.
Nice.
And I definitely was focused on alternative thinking, and they didn't call it integrative medicine back then, and alternative therapies and holistic health, and sort of fascinated by all that herbal medicine. I studied a lot of that. But I was traditionally trained, and I was a traditional family doctor doing traditional medicine in a small town in Idaho. It was really gratifying. And I was really, one of the few doctors in this small town. It was a Native American reservation. And then I left there after 4 years and went to China for a year and came back. I was working in the ER as a sort of transition. And I realized, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to sort of seek out to go back to what I was sort of first interested in. And, I got invited. I ran into someone in a bookstore, and they were like, saw me buying a book called Spontaneous Healing by Andy Weil. And they're like, oh, I'm the director of health and healing at Canyon Ranch. Do you want to come over and get a tour? I said I was a doctor. I was like, sure. And the next thing I know, they offered me a job as the medical director at Canyon Ranch. It was just, I didn't apply for it. I didn't ask for it. And at the same time, like a few months after I had gotten the job, I got very sick. I got chronic fatigue syndrome. I had mercury poisoning from living in China. I ate something, or I don't know, got exposed to something in a camp in Maine where I was for the summer. And I just got very, very ill. And it was through that illness that I figured out how the body actually worked. And I had to relearn medicine and relearn how the body worked as an integrated ecosystem, as a network, as a biological system. And that really sort of was for my own healing. And then I started applying it to my patients, and I realized that this was completely resonant with what I really always thought. And I went back and I was cleaning out my attic this summer. It's like all this stuff you get to do here, have nowhere to go. And I found this old notebook that I had from this course that I sort of self-designed on systems healing. And I was reading Gregory Bateson and Steps to an Ecology of Mind. And he was the father of modern systems theory. And I realized that, everything's connected, and the body's an integrated network, and the siloed approach to medicine just doesn't make sense. And now we're seeing this come to fruition. Like the microbiome is an extraordinary example of how all of our old concepts of disease are breaking down. I mean, how does these microbes in our gut influence every single thing about our biology, from our mood to autism, to autoimmune disease, to cancer, to diabetes, to heart disease, I mean, to acne, you name it, it's connected to our gut. And that doesn't make sense in our current paradigm. So functional medicine is an operating system that attempts to really describe what are the laws of biology, right? So for century plus, we've understood there are laws of physics, there's Newtonian physics and theories of relativity, but there's no real theory of biology in a sense. It's like there are some concepts, but especially in medicine, it's been a very reactive science. It's like, oh, your head hurts, go to the head doctor. Your stomach hurts, go to the stomach doctor. But it's like that old song, the knee bone's connected to the shin bone, and it's like everything's connected in a network that doesn't actually represent the artificial organ systems that we've sort of identified, or parts. And traditional medicine is very much like that. Like Chinese medicine, it's all about the influences of each system on each other and the dynamic interactions between the systems, and about balance and imbalance in the body. And so that's what functional medicine is. It's an understanding from a Western biomedical scientific perspective, what are the underlying influences on our biological networks, and where are the things that drive imbalance? How do we create balance? And so, it's like, it's a spleen qi deficiency or a yang excess or whatever it is in Chinese medicine. There are similar frameworks for these imbalances in our system. And so functional medicine is a very sophisticated methodology, operating system to understand human biology in a way that it's never been done before. And the results are really extraordinary.
And what is most exciting for you in that domain, since we're kind of on it? Is it gut biome? Is it regeneration? What are some of the things that kind of give you the most excitement to talk about, that you feel like, whoa, this is now like kind of been hidden and now it's coming into the light? And it's
Well, I think functional medicine is a weird term. Honestly, it doesn't really speak to most people. What is functional medicine? Well, it's the opposite of dysfunctional medicine. It's about function, right? So how our bodies function and how we optimize function, what impairs function. But I think a more useful term is what I've been calling regeneration, right? What is regenerative health, regenerative health care? So we talk about regenerative agriculture, but it's very much a similar idea, which is how do we regenerate health? Because if you create health, then disease tends to go away as a side effect, right? So health is actually something we don't learn about in medical school. We learn about disease. So functional medicine is the science of how we create health and how we restore ecosystems, how we regenerate biology. So I've literally had to do this with myself multiple times. I've had those sort of hero's journey where I get knocked to my knees, almost die, get really sick, and then have to sort of resurrect and figure out how to regenerate my own biology, whether it's my gut or my detoxification system or my immune system or my hormones. And it's like, I've been sort of my own case study.
Was it 3 years ago? You were, on death's door, but you were doing really, really bad. I remember that. So you've had your own life has been your laboratory, it sounds like.
Exactly. Yeah. I was, it's like, first was mercury in China. Then I ended up getting mold toxicity from living in an old moldy barn where I lived in and didn't realize it, and ended up, it was a perfect storm of insults, which is often what happens. If you take the lineage and timeline of somebody's health issue, you can usually see what's going on. And for me, I had an antibiotic for a root canal that I had taken out. That gave me C. diff. I had mold underlying. This was sort of set the stage. I was coughing for a year. I broke my arm 3 weeks later, and then boom, everything collapsed. And so I was 30 pounds lighter than I am now. I couldn't work. I was in bed. I couldn't function. I couldn't think. I couldn't really do anything. And I was really struggling to just even kind of navigate my way out, even with all my functional medicine tools. So I had to learn a whole new approach of how do you resurrect the body's own innate healing mechanisms, right? So we can do a lot of stuff to the body. We can give you herbs, or we can give you vitamins, or we can give you whatever. But the question is, how do you actually activate this miraculous response in the body that's a healing, regenerative response? And so whether it's, applying that to myself, applying to my patients, but now I can't stop thinking about the the bigger ecosystem in which we live, the planetary ecosystem and the ecosystem of humanity, and how those are related to our own health and what we do to ourselves, we do to the planet, what we do to the planet, we do to ourselves. And so I began to think about, well, for many of my patients, food is really the driver of most of their problems, right? Our ultra processed diet, our high levels of starch and sugar, refined and processed foods. And I'm like, well, if that's true, if food is causing their illness, I can't really treat them in my office, right? So what's causing the food that they're eating? Well, it's the food system and our food policies. And that's what's causing those food policies. It's the food industry, right? And so I began to sort of go down that rabbit hole and began to sort of look at, right from the seeds we grow to how we take care of the soil, to the nutrient quality of the food that comes out of it, to how it's processed, to what we eat. And I began to see this web of connection where human health, planetary health are all connected. I mean, the fact that we're sick, right? 6 out of 10 of us are sick, 75% of us are overweight, 88% of us are metabolically unhealthy. That means 12% Americans are healthy, which is terrifying when you look at that statistic, considering those are the ones at most risk for death from COVID. And the planet is sick, right? Our biodiversity is declining. The biodiversity of our own microbiome is declining. The biodiversity of the soil is declining. Our plant species are declining. Our livestock species, our bird species, our pollinator species are down 75%. Our climate is unstable, and we're releasing huge amounts of carbon in the atmosphere. A lot of it's from agriculture and how we grow our food. So I began to realize that in order to actually heal humans, we also need to heal the earth. And the earth is going to be fine. If we get annihilated, if we go extinct, like, the earth will recover, right? And you look at Chernobyl now, it's like an incredible ecosystem full of plants and animals and wolves and deer and bear. It's like, and everything's taken over all the buildings. It's like nature has reclaimed the earth, right? And I think that's will happen very quickly if we disappear, because we're the parasite on the earth. But I think, if we want to heal ourselves, we also have to heal the planet, because the ecosystem is driving so many changes that are creating instability for humanity and food insecurity. And just by the depletion of our soil, we've robbed ourselves of nutrition. I mean, even the best broccoli today grown in the soils that we have is half as nutritious as it was 50 years ago. Now, if you have a regenerative farm, different, but for most of the stuff we eat, the nutrient density, the phytochemicals, everything has just gone away.
And how do you hold all of that awareness? Because it's important to know, and it's important to research and understand. And how do you hold it in a way that you feel like you can take that and make a positive impact? Because I think a lot of people hearing this go, oh, yeah, and you're right, man.
And how do I not lay in bed sucking my thumb all day, you mean?
Yeah.
And
where does one be able to hold that and then also feel some level of capacity or ability to engage and act? And I know you have a lot of different books. I'd love to talk to you about this new book, because it feels like a whole different part of you is opening up. But how do you hold that in yourself? Do you feel like, all right, my job is to take that and to write and to do podcasts? I know you have a very popular podcast, which I'd love to watch. How are you taking that and kind of feeling like you're putting action into the world without staying in bed all day?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You look at somebody like the Dalai Lama, and I'm definitely not comparing myself to him, but his whole culture was destroyed. His country was taken from him. There was genocide on his population. The Chinese are trying to usurp the next generation of Tibetan spiritual leaders. And he's just a happy dude, and he's working really hard to bring awareness about the plight, to help people wake up, to address the social inequities. And he realized, I think he's got the long view, right? And I remember being in a lecture with him once, and someone said, something about like saving humanity and the planet. He just kind of laughed. He's like, you don't get it. Like, this has been going on for thousands of years. We have always been in these existential struggles. We're still always trying to wake up, and it may take another 1,000 or 10,000 years. And, it's like, you just have to show up and have fun and do your best and not be so attached to what's happening. Right. So it's like, how do you actually just show up and be in the service? So for me, it's really not toward a real hard end, although I do have a lot of focus on what I would like to see the world be. But I
Mhm.
also don't tie my own happiness into whether or not it happens, because I also understand we're in this big cycle of, you know, spiritual evolution as a species, and it might take, thousands of years. So I try not to like let my own happiness be tied to the suffering that's out there in the world, and just be in service of whatever I can do to relieve that suffering in whatever way I can.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that comes up for that for me when you're talking about it is the whole kind of piece around stress and sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, and how we're living, particularly with media and news and information, and the lifestyles that many people live today, where there's this constant feeling of worry, and whether that's worry about the planet, or worry about my followers on Instagram going away, or worry about the worry can take many different forms. But I'd love for you to say a little bit about what we're discovering as we look at how our systems are able to either absorb or not absorb nutrients based on our own nervous system, and kind of ways people have found in which we can kind of take more charge of whether we're living in that stress response, or whether we're actually engaging in a more Buddha natured approach to life. And now there seems to be some studies and science around that. So I'd love to hear your
Oh,
thoughts on
yeah, I mean, this is certainly certainly something you've clearly focused on with the mindfulness summit. I think that the biology of what's happening to us is kind of scary when you understand the impacts of the food, the pollution,
that. Mhm.
the constant sort of information pollution that we're exposed to, which is sort of at a scale that is, I think the average person, like in a day, has more stuff coming at them than the average human did, in a year or in their lifetime 150 years ago, right? Um, and the EMFs and electromagnetic frequencies that we're exposed to. So there's all these impacts on our nervous system, the light bulb, which has altered our circadian rhythms, and all these are physiologic stress, right? And so they activate us in a way that actually depletes our nervous system and causes what we call sympathetic overdrive, which is the stress response. And so we constantly are living in this state of activation, which is why we see so much insomnia, so much disease, so much depression, anxiety. And these are all symptoms of this constant activation of the stress response. And the parasympathetic response is really profoundly effective in sort of the antidote to that.
Mhm.
But it's, and there's all the ways we know how to access it. Through the breath is probably the easiest, through breathing, through meditation, through yoga, through prayer. So there's all these access points, through nature, through love, through connection. There's a lot of ways to activate this part of our nervous system, but we just have an imbalance between the sympathetic and this parasympathetic nervous system that's creating so much disease.
Right. And so it used to be that the stress we would feel would be immediate, right? A tiger is coming and we have to address it. And so there would be a way in which we're like, okay, we need access to that. And it seems like currently today, there's stressors that we imagine, if they feel like a tiger is attacking us, even if it's just reading the tweet by the president or reading something harsh that somebody says. And I feel like that's actually a huge challenge for us, that we don't see. It's hard to see the impact of that for me, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
if I go out in nature and I spend some time, which I know you love to do, backpacking or camping, I'm like, oh, I'm not holding all onto that. And I think it's a real challenge to be aware and to be conscious and to take in information and to understand what's going on politically, but also not become this kind of ball of tension and then try to act in the world. And of course, whatever we do from that ball of tension just doesn't seem to be of service. And so, I look at you as somebody who seems to be trying to get a field of it all, right? Like, I'm really interested in the health and wellness piece. I'm really interested in our mental space and how we're bringing energy. I'm really interested in individual. I'm really interested in interconnection. And I feel like I don't know the answer, but I feel like if there is an answer, it's going to come from all those pieces, like you said, right? It's not going to be like, oh, wow, you're healthy, but the planet sucks. Right? Too bad for the planet, but we had a good year. And I'm curious if that is in part what inspired you to be writing. Was it Notes from God or Notes? Is
Notes
that
from God, stumbling toward the truth.
yeah, is
It's
that
kind of a departure for me. I think it's the first
yeah,
time I
no.
said it out loud. So,
No,
but
but
it,
I'm curious because like for me, it's like we have all these parts, right? Like I have a part of me that it just is more mystical, right? I have a part of me that's super practical. And so I feel like right now we need access to all of it, right?
Mhm.
If we're going to make this next chapter of human civilization, it's going to be the scientific, it's going to be the intuitive, it's going to be the mystical, it's going to be, you know, all of it coming together is the best sense that I have. And so I'm curious, yeah, just how you see that and whether that was inspired because you needed kind of to look bigger. You need to kind of find some larger support system for your own self and for what is guiding you.
Yeah, I mean,
It just sounded fun.
I really feel like I have been the same guy since I was little, and I've just gotten a little bit wiser and smarter about navigating it all, and a little happier and a little less hooked into the drama of everything. I mean, I still get activated for sure when I read things or I see things, or and I sort of have a fatal optimism, so that I'm always sort of pop up and go, okay, well, I think we can make a step towards something better. We can, you know,
Yeah.
move towards the light. And so I've for myself, it's been a challenge because I've had a lot of personal physical challenge. I've had a lot of relationship love challenges, and I've had a lot of great successes. But it's just sort of an incredible like soup of life that's sort of shaped and molded me. And I'm still molding. Like I'm still learning, growing, discovering.
Yeah.
And I think, when I was young, I used to think that, geez, when I got to be 30, I'll have it all figured out, like then I got to be 40, I'll like have it all figured out. And when I get to be 50, it's like, and I'm 60, I'm like, still going on here. And I see people who are, 70s and 80s still exploring, learning, growing, or not, like, and I think for me, it's just a hunger to
Yeah.
understand, to know, and to just be in a place of service and
Yeah.
adding more to the goodness than the darkness. I mean, that's just a little bit. And if you just a
Yeah.
little bit, and if all of us just a little bit, maybe that would be a lot.
Yeah. And when I hear you talk, I think, so many people are struggling during COVID. There's the financial uncertainty, economic uncertainty, but there's also just the relational challenges. I've definitely faced them with my children and my partner in terms of being all together
Yeah.
on each other. And I would think, oh, I'm so not going to get triggered by that anymore. And something happens and I'm as triggered as I ever was. And
Yeah.
I do think there's this kind of role of like, how do we have compassion for us? How do we have awareness for ourselves? But then where does compassion come in, both for the individual, but then also for the society? And if we understand that there's this, and I think that's very much a part of what you've tried to bring in, right? Awareness and compassion from your kind of Buddhist roots.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that training early on was great because it gave me sort of a roadmap, but it was more intellectual. And so
Yeah.
life has given me the hard knocks to actually go, oh, okay. And to see the patterns, and to sort of see the way in which your mind works that creates all the suffering. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think I've been really blessed. I mean, I've just been, aside from having all these knockdowns in my life, I also have had the chance to sort of really recover and sort of learn and grow, and actually, without all those challenges, I don't think I would be who I am.
Yeah. And what are some of the things in terms of the topic of regeneration that you're like, all right, three things that I've learned from when I'm at rock bottom that might not get somebody out of rock bottom, but they're just kind of like helpful building tools that I've discovered that anybody can kind of do. I'm curious kind of like what would be, if you had to name a few, it's like, all right, these are the core essentials.
Yeah. I mean,
Mindfulness practice could be one, but I'd be curious what your core pieces are.
well, the psycho-emotional um, stresses that we experience create a physiologic state, right? They create like an actual physiologic change in your biology. And so it became very clear to me early on that I could change my physiological state that would change my psycho-emotional state and spiritual state. And so I became very adept at learning tools to do that in a deliberate way. And I wrote a book about 12 years ago I was looking at the book proposal. It was 2006 actually, and
Wow.
it was called the Ultra Mind Solution. It was about how the body affects the mind. And so it's a bidirectional loop, but most of us ignore the body mind effect. We focus on the mind body effect, which is very powerful and real and great, and accessing that is important. But we neglect the fact that we can change our mind by changing our body.
Hmm.
And so I began to sort of incorporate over my life and aggregate tools, whether it was meditation or exercise or yoga or massage or a steam in an ice bath or listening to a visualization, whatever the tool was. Food is a powerful tool because that changes your state immediately. And for good or bad, it can drive inflammation, it can drive brain inflammation, it can make you feel elevated, or it can make you feel depressed. And so I began to learn how to use food and movement and play and heat and cold and all these different modalities to actually change my physiologic state so that I could actually help sort of reset my mental state. And that's been incredibly helpful.
And that's partly individualized. So part of what you would be saying would be to discover what that is for you. Like here's a menu of options, but that each person has to kind of discover what helps to reset that system. Right.
Exactly. Right.
And then in terms of healing the planet, are there things that we can each do that you feel like would be steps in that dimension? I know that's Paul Hawking, who's our mutual friend, and the others are just so committed to putting out more and more literature and more information that's kind of like guiding us. And I think once COVID passes, which hopefully it will, there'll be this other challenge that we face. Like even with that going, we still have to deal with this fact that we're on a planet that is in desperate need of a whole change of lifestyle. And I'm curious if you have kind of pieces that people that do or that you're doing that you feel like, all right, here's some actions we can take.
I mean, I think that this sort of idea I've been sort of toying with is how do we all become regenitarians, right? There's paleo and vegan, and it's like so many diet wars. I'm like, wait, we all can agree that we want to regenerate our own health and we want to regenerate our communities and regenerate the planet and environmental and climate and all that. And so the beautiful thing about it's all aligned. If you focus on regenerating your health, you're going to be doing things that are going to help regenerate the planet. If you focus on eating the most nutrient dense food, well, that means it's have to be grown a certain way, which is using regenerative agriculture that restores the soil, that sequesters carbon, that conserves water, that increases biodiversity, that increases bird populations and pollinator species, and stops polluting waterways and stops killing hundreds of thousands of tons of metric tons of fish in the Gulf of Mexico from the fertilizers. And I could go on and on. And so when you sort of think about what are the choices and behaviors and actions that you can take individually, there's hundreds of them that allow you to move an inch towards becoming a regenitarian. And then we can't all eat regenerative food because there isn't enough around to go, right? I mean, about less than 1% of teenagers, less than 2% of men, and about 3% of women eat the recommended amount of fruits and vegetables. And if we all did, there wouldn't be enough to go around because only 3% of our agricultural lands are growing specialty crops or fruits and vegetables. Forget regenitarian food, like forget, regenerative, just like regular fruits and vegetables. So like we have to move the marketplace, we have to move agriculture. And so those are things that can happen, but our choices, our actions, our voices matter. So I always say we can vote with our voice, we can vote with our fork, we can vote with our wallet, and we can vote with our vote. And all those things matter. And I think people feel disconnected and disenfranchised, but it really has an impact. I mean, just as an example, Danone and General Mills, which we think of as big bad food, they're actually now funding farmers to convert to regenerative agriculture.
Wow.
So they're like literally transforming millions of acres of land that's in their supply chain to regenerative agriculture because they understand that their success and their future profitability lays in having the ability to get food grown in a sustainable way, or in fact, a regenerative way, because without regenerating the soil, we will have no food left because the soil is depleted and we can't grow any food in 60 more harvests. So we're kind of screwed. And these companies are trying to understand it's in their business interest to do this. And they're really anting up. And it's not just a window dressing, greenwashing effort.
Right. And the more that we ask for that, or the more that we purchase that, or the more that we support that, that's going to inspire them to address that.
Yeah. And that's why I wrote Food Fix, which is my latest book. how to save our health, our economy, our communities, and our planet one bite at a time. And there's a whole lot of action steps for what we can do as individuals, what we can do as business innovators, what we can do as policymakers, as educators. So there's philanthropists. There's a lot of things that we can do to really impact the course of our overall health. And I'm excited. I see the changes happening. So while I see a lot of darkness happening, I also see a lot of incredible consciousness and innovation happening in the space. Just the fact that these big food companies are starting to wake up and actually get involved with regenerative agriculture, and that, because and I think connecting agriculture and healthcare, doctors and farmers, is so critical, because it's a continuum of a problem that is impacting the health of our earth and the health of our human population. Right. And they're so connected. And
but so, they don't touch each other generally. The farmer and the doctor are very far apart.
No, and even just the fact that food and healthcare is just so far apart, right? So the Food Fix effort is really driving a campaign to change policy, to work on educating and advocating for real changes, to create food as medicine, to innovate new policies and coordinate new policies around our food policies that are smart, whether it's dietary guidelines or food stamps, school lunches, food marketing, on, and then to really support regenerative agriculture. And those three pillars will allow us to really transform our healthcare system, our agricultural system, our environment. I mean, it's so many levels, resurrect communities that are struggling, because they're not all separate problems. And that's just how I think. It's just see the web of connections, and it's all sort of connected.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we have, like, I haven't actually looked at obesity levels recently, but a few years ago, I remember looking at, like, we know now more about the negative health impacts of obesity. We know about what causes obesity, the dangers of obesity, and yet obesity rates are still super high, right? So you would think, oh, you have all the knowledge, you know what to do, and yet, no, there's this whole complex system, right, of human behavior and human conditioning that has to also be turned around as part of that, right? So it's like telling somebody this, it's like there's a whole complex system. And I love that you're trying to see all the pieces in that system, and what can we upgrade to in this next chapter? What would that look like?
I think there's been a lot of talk lately about structural racism, but there's another really useful concept that sort of is akin to that, which is structural violence, which are the social, economic, political, environmental conditions that drive disease. And this was a term that was sort of popularized by Paul Farmer, talking about how these populations in Haiti and many underserved developing countries were unable to address these horrible pandemics of AIDS and tuberculosis because they didn't have the infrastructure to get the medicines and to make sure they took the medicine. They didn't have clean water, they didn't have a place to sleep, they didn't have a wash. And it's like so many layers of problems. And you realize it wasn't a medical problem, it was a structural problem. And so what I realized is that chronic illness and obesity, these are structural issues. They're related to the social, economic, and political conditions that drive disease. And so addressing those structural issues is really critical as we begin to sort of reimagine this, because we can't put it on the individual. It's your fault you're fat. Just stop eating that junk food. Stop drinking that soda. Like, it's your fault. It's just nonsense, because one, the structural environment makes it very difficult to do the right thing. And two, these foods are designed to be biologically addictive, which makes it very hard to change behavior. So, and then we don't have the structures for proper behavior change in society anymore. We're all, I mean, now more than ever, we're all isolated, alone, disconnected. Society is divided like it's never been before. And that is leading to a sort of a disintegration of the social structures that keep us happy, supported, connected, learning traditions, right? The community, the tribe. These are things that really only in the last couple of generations have we been removed from. Like I was talking to my my mother's younger first cousin, like probably 20 years younger. My mother died, and she's, probably now this woman's in her 70s. And she was sharing with me the story of how they all grew up in Brooklyn, and they were all in the same block, and they were all in the same neighborhood, and they all were with each other all the time, and they all played. It's such a foreign idea that we all grow up and live with our extended families and our tribe in a way that's meaningful and connected, and that's makes us feel that we belong, and that we have traditions, that we have heritage, that we have an understanding of how to, do things, right? Like my grandmother used to take carp and put it in the bathtub and like make gefilte fish from fresh carp, and everything was made from scratch, you know?
I can sense that. I haven't had that, but I can feel that, like that in my, which I love to go to certain places in Europe, like Italy, where everybody seems to feel like they're family, right? There's a sense, and it's just from my own perception, of course, but I think there's that longing that I have and that many of us have to feel like we belong to something. I think that's a big challenge of the United States right now, is that sense of belonging, that we're one nation, one people. It's been so disseminated because they know that getting people pissed off about the other side raises a lot of money and gets a lot of clicks. And so I think that sense of belonging to something deeper and bigger, and a family is such a beautiful way of starting. But I think that's a deep longing that a lot of us have. I know people who've been super successful and sold their company for millions and billions, and then they go in their big palatial house and they're just depressed as hell.
Right,
Because, you know, without a loved one or without people that care about you, without people, it's like, hey, Mark, how you doing? You know, it's a hard life. Yeah.
It's true. That is the most important medicine. You know, food is medicine, but also community is medicine.
Yeah.
And I think people underestimate that. And I think that's really clear when you look at the blue zones that Dan Buettner's talked about.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the food and real food mostly.
Yeah.
And two, it's the social fabric that people grow up in, stay connected to, that gives meaning, purpose to their life, that, you know, carries them through the tough times, the joyful times. And it's just it's something that in my own life, I've been really deliberate in creating that intentional sense of community among my friends and colleagues. And it's really the stuff that matters at the end of the day. It's not how much stuff you have or how many places you've been to, or, you know, how many pair of shoes you have, what great restaurants you ate. And it's really about this social fabric that holds you. And that's what's so sad in America today. And I think we're seeing it more than ever right now because of COVID. It's exacerbating it, but it's loneliness. It's, if you look at risk factors for disease, loneliness is probably the top risk factor. It's because it sort of leads to everything else, right? It leads to poor behaviors and maladaptive ways of responding. And I feel like this is a book that was written by Vivek Murthy, who's the former Surgeon General, called Together. And he was on my podcast, The Doctor's Pharmacy, and sharing about
Listener 2.0 last year too. Great guy.
Yeah, and he's just such a sweetheart. And I remember visiting him in the Surgeon General's office, and he's like, "Oh, you know, every day we stop at 3 o'clock. We all meditate for 20 minutes." I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. I mean, I wish there was some thoughtfulness and meditation in government right now, but
there could be coming soon. But I do feel like there's you know, Eckhart Tolle has this phrase. He says the choice is clear: either we perish or evolve. And I do feel like a lot of people are kind of sensing that, right? Like, we're going to perish or we're going to evolve. And then what does that evolve look like? So I'm somewhat hopeful that the next years ahead, because the pressure cooker is getting so much more intense, that it actually inspires certain pretty amazing change that might not have happened had we not been all put in this pressure cooker of COVID and a very unsettling leadership. And that all of this, I don't know, all this will either lead to evolution or perishment. And I'm hopeful that the pressure cooker can bring forth, and I value so much the work that you do, and the Doctor's Pharmacy podcast I listen to a lot, because I feel like all of our pieces are needed to kind of push the scales slightly toward the evolution turn. But I'm hopeful that a lot of that, how we do food, how we live together, how we build homes, how we build cities, like how we travel, like, you know, a lot of these areas potentially could be rethought. There's no reason it can't be, you know, like Elon figures out ways to take rockets out to space and back. Like, we should be able to figure out, like Elon Musk, like we should be able to figure some of these things out if enough people are focused on them. So So thank you. I know, is there anything that we did not talk about that you're like, we really need to talk about? We have a few more minutes, but I'm super happy with what we've covered. And if there's something that just also feels super important, want to give you space to talk about it.
Yeah, no, I think this is one of those moments where humanity's been sent to its room for a timeout to think about what it's done and how to come out of the room and do it better. And I do feel sort of paradoxically hopeful that out of this chaos and suffering and loss will come So some level of awareness of how we need to do things differently. And there can be a movement toward regeneration, toward regenerating communities, regenerating the soil, regenerating, our biodiversity, our human biology, which has been so devastated by the way we live right now. And I'm actually excited about that. I think and again, we all might be gone in 50 years, so like it is what it is. But it's something good to do while you're here on the planet. What else are you gonna do?
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us and be a part of the summit, and just for the work that you're doing. And really look forward to kind of continuing to partner with you in any way that makes sense, and love what you're creating, and super excited for your next book. Actually, you've got
Thank
me engaged. Like, I want to know what that is. And so again, thank you so much for taking the
you. Of
time.
course. Thank you.